Welcome back to the channel. In this video, I'll be talking about the recent fight announcement of Stipe Miocic defending his heavyweight title against light heavyweight champion Daniel Cormier. And this fight is being marketed as a super fight, but I don't quite agree. And I want to talk about the history of super fights as far as MMA goes. And I will talk about how I think each of these fighters will match up against one another. But first, I want to talk about the history of super fights in MMA, in MMA history. So let me first get into it. So if you think about it over the past, or in the past recent years, past 10 years, maybe less, maybe more, the biggest fight or super fight that could have happened in MMA was Anderson Silva versus GSP. But that fight never materialized. Anderson Silva was the middleweight king, GSP was the welterweight king, and they both cleared out the division several times and really didn't have any clear contenders at several times. And the fight was supposed to materialize but never materialized. Either GSP was scared or something just fall through, or GSP didn't like the matchup. Whatever the case, the fight never happened. And it would have been the biggest fight probably in MMA history easily. It was MMA's equivalent of Mayweather versus Pacquiao. It was a fight everybody wanted, but for some reason one fighter didn't want it as much, and it kept falling through and never happening. And it was just a fight people were talking about and wanting it to happen. That's one factor. It needs to be a want for this fight to happen. It needs to be a build up for this fight to happen. And both fighters gotta be like, if you feel like you need the fighters to be so dominant over their division. Stipe is dominant over his division, but it still seems like he beat the man that beat the man. He never beat the man himself. He didn't beat Kane. I think he could definitely beat Kane. I think he would be favored to beat Kane, but he wasn't the man to take out Kane. He took out Werdum, the man who beat the man. So it's kind of takes away from his legacy a bit, or at least from the aura, the buildup of that aura. And then Dan Cormier, as dominant as he's been, as good as he's been, just not even that long ago, not even a 4 year ago, he just got knocked out by John Jones. Whether or not John Jones took steroids or this or whatever the case is, whether it's clean or not, it still resonates that he was just recently got knocked out. Recently was crying after the fight, and that's very recent. It's not, so it kind of takes away from the fight. It's still a super fight, like what's on the line is there's a lot on the line, a lot of legacy, and it's a very big fight, very talented fighters, definitely hopped in the pound for pound list. Some of the best fighters in the whole sport period, in whole sports history period. But it just doesn't have that aura that you necessarily need to have like one of these big mega super fights. It's still going to have history behind it, but a lot of it's missing a lot of factors, I think. So like I said, when they had Ansel versus GSP was the super fight everybody wanted. They both were dominant. They both seemed like they were unbeatable. So you wanted to match them against each other, the kingpins versus the kingpins. And they had the aura, they had the build up, they had the want. It was years. People kept clamoring for this fight, but it never happened. And then you go back maybe a little bit further. You had Chuck Liddell versus Wanderlei Silva, the fight that eventually happened, but it happened way after it was wanted. It still was want for the fight, but it definitely lost a lot of its pill. But at one time, Chuck Liddell was dominated, like the dominant king of the light heavyweight division in the UFC. And Wanderlei was reigning over the light heavyweight division or the middleweight division. It still was 205, but he was reigning over that 205 division in Pride. So it's Pride versus UFC, the two biggest organizations in MMA, and two of the biggest stars in both of these. Or you could say maybe the biggest stars. I think Wanderlei had most of the records in Pride period, and Chuck Liddell was just kind of UFC's guy. He was Dana White's best buddy. He was the face. They were making him the face of the UFC, so it was the face of Pride basically versus face of UFC, and that was a big deal. So that was a super fight. Another super fight that could have happened was Fedor versus pretty much anyone. If Fedor would have fought Brock Lesnar because Fedor was basically he was a mythical being for the longest time in MMA. Can anybody beat this guy? He was undefeated for technically undefeated for like over 10 years, I think. He was beating he was having those super freaky fights, fighting people that had 7-footers. He was fighting people over 400 pounds, fighting sumo wrestlers. He was doing all this weird stuff. And on top of that, he was beating the best heavyweights that existed at that time in Pride. He was beating Crow Cop, he was beating Nogueira, etc. He was beating all the best people he could possibly beat. He was beating Hall of Famers like Mark Coleman and stuff. So he was beating everybody he could possibly beat that was available and that was good at the time. So, and even continued in that time, he was knocked out Tim Sylvia, and he just rear naked choked Tim Sylvia, knocked out Andre Arlovski, two heavyweight champions of the UFC. So he was still pretty much putting in his dues, and he was undefeated still at the time. So he would fought Brock Lesnar, who was this big physical specimen. That would have been a big money fight. I don't know how much it would have been for a super fight, but it definitely would have been a big fight because off of being Fader, it would based off of being UFC, and in UFC history, that's the fighter that they wanted more than anybody, especially Dana White. Dana White had the biggest grudge against Fader than anybody he'll ever have a grudge against. He wanted Fader so bad. He hated Fader, but he loved Fader. He wanted Fader in the UFC at all costs, but Fader was not really trying to give in, or unless they bought an M1 Global or some other stuff. So that was the fighter they wanted more than any other fighter in UFC or MMA history. They wanted Fader in the UFC, but it never materialized. But just by having Fader in the UFC, fighting a UFC heavyweight champion, especially like a Brock Lesnar or a Cain Velasquez, I think maybe Brock Lesnar fight would have sold more than any fight in history, but Cain Velasquez would have earned more respect. The Cain Velasquez versus Fader fight would earn more respect than maybe the Brock Lesnar fight. But they both would have been huge selling fights, and they would have been mega fights, and those were fights kind of talked about. Maybe not as much Anderson Silva versus GSP, but those fights were talked about. I think they might have probably outsold a potential Anderson Silva versus GSP fight, but they never happened. So a lot of these super fights never happened. I think you could kind of say Conor McGregor had super fights, but I wouldn't call those super fights either. Even though he did become a two-weight champion by beating Eddie Alvarez. Eddie Alvarez had just won the fight. It was kind of, you could say, a lucky win. I wouldn't call it a lucky win because I felt that not Conor McGregor, I felt that Eddie Alvarez could have won that matchup just based off styles. So I kind of saw that he could have won that matchup. But it still was kind of, you could say, not the cleanest, not the clearest victory. It was not like a dominant beatdown. It was he just caught Dos Anjos. Even though he was setting up the whole fight for as long as it lasted, that one less than a round, finished him in the first round. He was trying to set that strike up several times before finally landing it clean. But it still wasn't like a dominant, maybe like a Max Holloway versus Aldo type of match where he just clearly showed that he was the dominant fighter. It was just kind of a I caught you type of win. So it's not the same exact feeling, or don't get you the same exact credit by winning that way. So, and then it was so fresh off of that. And going to the match, you knew that you watch Eddie Alvarez fight or knew about Eddie Alvarez, you know that he was a bad match. I mean, that Conor McGregor was a bad matchup for Eddie Alvarez because Eddie Alvarez gets hit a lot. So it wasn't like no big surprise that Conor McGregor would win. Maybe not as dominant as he won, but you knew, kind of feeling like the fight should lean to Conor McGregor in that matchup. A crisp, like accurate striker with power and speed, and probably actually was the bigger fighter versus a striker who probably kind of leaves himself open a little bit more and doesn't have the best chin, but definitely has a lot of heart. But you're gonna keep getting hit clean, the heart's gonna go out of the way pretty quickly, especially you guys don't have the best chin. So I'm kind of going off the topic a bit, but to come back to the main event, another super fight that happened was Kazuchi Sakuraba versus Royce Gracie. And that fight actually happened where a lot of these other super fights didn't happen. Kazuchi Sakuraba versus Royce Gracie was a matchup of just the old when back when the Gracies were such mythical beings. They had the whole Gracie families. They barely ever lost, and they created this whole jiu-jitsu and stuff. And they were back in those early days when Royce Gracie hadn't lost yet. And you just think nobody could beat Royce Gracie. He had won all those UFC tournaments. He had this art that no one could beat. And then pretty much before that fight, Kazuchi Sakuraba had already beaten the Gracie before. And then he come in this fight, it was like pretty much kind of a grudge matchup going up. And then they fought in this long matchup, and Kazuchi Sakuraba came out a winner. And that was a super fight. It was a lot of stuff behind it. It was not just more so, oh, this fight is good, that fight is good. It was some type of grudge. It was something more to it, a want for it, some hype behind it. But this fight versus Daniel Cormier versus Stipe, I don't really see like it being necessarily like some super want for it. They just kind of pulled this fight out of nowhere. I guess they said Stipe beat Ngannou. They wanted Stipe kind of lose Ngannou, but so since he won, let's give him another matchup, try and make it more entertaining since we don't have Ngannou as champion. And Daniel Cormier, since he talking about retiring, might as well. It just seemed like a might as well happen fight instead of some fight that necessarily anybody was like wanting. I think it'll be a great fight, but I don't think it's no fight that necessarily nobody was really asking for, or it was in a big whole type of fan conversation, no real build up or desire for this fight to happen. But it's a fight they just decided to make happen. And I think it'll be great. It'll sell, but I think it could actually underperform maybe what people expect. I think at lowest it will be do $500, and I think at most it do maybe 1.2 million. I don't think it's gonna be no big mega fight where it's gonna break any super records anywhere, or it's definitely not gonna break any UFC pay-per-view records. Not gonna break any overall pay-per-view records. But I think it'll do fairly well. But I think it's gonna be one of those type of maybe GSP versus Michael Bisping type fights where you expect to do well, but it's still just gonna do probably 800,000 in the end. It's not gonna be nothing crazy as far as how much sales it does. It's gonna be good, but it's not gonna be great. So that's how I think this fight is gonna play out as far as pay-per-view sales. And as far as historical wise, I just think it doesn't have. I don't think neither fight necessarily has that aura on either side. I think a fight, maybe a light heavyweight versus heavyweight fight that would have been great in the past, was definitely with John Jones versus Cain Velasquez. That was another super fight people were clamoring for because you felt that Cain Velasquez was the man in the heavyweight division, and he couldn't. Nobody could beat him. Stipe, you feel like he can beat everybody, but you also feel like you don't really feel like he's untouchable or he's just the man. He's the man, but you don't feel like he's the man exactly yet. And Danny Cormier, obviously, he lost to John Jones, whether it be tainted or not. He just got knocked out less than a year ago. So it's like they don't really have necessarily, neither of them have the aura yet. They both had the same number of title defenses. They both had 3. So they both pretty much held their own pretty well and fared well for themselves and are top-notch fighters and deserve all the props. But I just don't feel like neither of them really have the aura yet. Or maybe they won't ever have it. And then let me not kind of downplay them anymore. I'm not trying to downplay them. I'm just trying to say what from my perspective. And now let me just get into the matchup. I think a lot of people are leaning to Stipe because he's pretty much been so dominant so far at heavyweight, is the champ, and been looking better and looking good, looking solid. He has a good wrestling background. You think he has a better striking than Dan Cormier. He has the height, the reach. And also you got Danny Cormier recently getting knocked out by John Jones. And I guess some people saying because John Jones didn't want to fight Stipe, so that means Stipe gonna be better than John Jones or something. So if Danny Cormier can't beat John Jones, that means Stipe gonna beat him. I don't really agree in that match. I think it's a 50-50 matchup. I think Stipe does have those stuff over him. He does have height over him. He does probably have the better striking. Danny Cormier will have the better wrestling, but maybe Stipe's just being a good enough wrestler and having the size will be able to negate Danny Cormier's wrestling. I think that's very true and could play out that way. But I think it could play out very 50-50. You got to realize that Dan Cormier was 13-0 that heavyweight division. You could say, oh, he beat Frank Mir and Roy Nelson, but he beat them rather easily. And the Roy Nelson fight, he beat Roy Nelson pretty much just enough to beat him. He'd beat him like just so he could get in time, so he could made it an easy fight. Just beat him clean and easy, just so he could get there and out of the fight and pretty much be a cornerman for Cain Velasquez in the main event of that card. He was a co-main event fighting Roy Nelson. And he just pretty much beat him up like it was a sparring match, like he was sparring some noob or something. Got Roy Nelson out of there, and he didn't finish him. I mean, he just pretty much had a clean decision over Roy Nelson, made it look easy, and then pretty much went back to the locker room, came back out and cornered Cain Velasquez against Junior Santos, like right there, like right after he finished the co-main event, he got back up and was cornering Cain Velasquez. So you can't really say, oh, he struggled with anybody heavyweight division. He didn't even lose a single round until he fought John Jones. So at heavyweight division, Dan Cormier was pretty dominant. Yeah, he was in just like one first round KO and everybody, but he was pretty much running through everybody. He didn't have any super struggles or whatever. He definitely had some bad moments here and there, maybe some bad moments. Probably good, not even some good moments by the average standard. He just had some people maybe land a good strike here and there, never was dropped. I don't think he was even dropped in the heavyweight division. So it's like he never had no super bad moments in the heavyweight division. And this was didn't lose a round, beat some pretty good people, former champion Josh Barnett. Who had Josh Barnett really lost to in over these past, you could say 10 years really, or 10, 5, 4 years? Who has he lost to? I think he lost to Danny Cormier and maybe he lost to Josh Barnett. I mean, not Josh Barnett. He lost to Travis Brown and Danny Cormier. I think that's the only 2 people he lost to over these past maybe 8, 10 years. I think he lost to Danny Cormier and Travis Brown. Travis Brown was kind of having his moment. He was on a streak. He beat Overeem. He beat Travis Brown. I mean, he beat Josh Barnett. So that was when Travis Brown was on it for lack of better words. He was on it. He was having his career performances. And it just showed in that fight. He got him with those little elbows from the clinch and when he was knocking everybody out with those. And that's pretty much his win. And since then, Josh Burnett hasn't really lost since then. So you can't really say that's bad, like for bad technique or anything. I think Josh Burnett's still one of the best heavyweights in the world. You can't say Josh Burnett, oh, he's a falling off heavyweight. Josh Burnett is still very much one of the best heavyweights in the world until he comes back and looks anything less of that. And Danny Cormier didn't give a single round to him. And was drawing him around too. So it's why I think people kind of underrate Danny Cormier's striking. I think Danny Cormier will be able to hold his own in the striking for the most part. Whether or not Stipe power is so mythical that he'll just knock Dan Cormier out as soon as he touches him, I don't think so. I think Dan Cormier has shown him a pretty good chin. And just like in that Volkan Oezdemir fight in the last fight, Volkan Oezdemir was supposed to have such a great power, and Dan Cormier was just recently got knocked out by John Jones. So it's like, oh, maybe he'll knock him out, be more susceptible to getting knocked out. But no, it didn't happen. He ate several of Oezdemir punches, was not phased at all. So it's like, I think Dan Cormier's chin will hold up pretty well, especially when he puts more weight on. He'll probably be able to eat more power because he'll have more weight on him and won't have to worry about cutting weight, so his chin will be better. I think his wrestling will probably be superior. I think as far as striking, I think they'll be able to mix it up pretty well in the fight. And I think it's going to be a 50-50 matchup. I think it's going to come down to who wants it more. Maybe DC might not want it as much because he's talking about retiring. And I think this fight is going to come down to really who wants it more. I think Stipe, I'll say, on paper and maybe off a recent track record, has the more advantages, so you should say it's going to lean towards him, but it's really 50-50. And if Dan Cormier is a huge underdog, I think that it'd be a smart bet to bet on Dan Cormier if he's a huge underdog. If it's a close fight, a close betting line, then I don't know about which side you should bet for. It's kind of up in the air because it's a pretty good matchup. I think it's going to be one of the better fights of the past, not even the past, probably of all time as far as MMA. I think it could shape up to be one of the better matchups of all time. And regardless of which fighter win, it would be big for their legacy and would be big for MMA. But that kind of completes my whole analysis of the history of super fights and my sizing up of both the fighters. If I had to pick who will win, I won't pick right now, but I will probably do a fight prediction when the fight actually gets close to happening and I actually study a little bit more of both fighters. Then I'll probably say who I'm gonna side on, who I'm gonna lean on. But right now, I'm kind of leaning towards Stipe, but I'm not sold on Stipe just yet. So thanks for watching the video. Like, comment, subscribe, and come back for more videos. I was born by the river,